Well, hello friends and anti-netters and, well, perhaps soon-to-be anti-netters, aka analog note takers, those who prefer to take notes and develop their mind in physical, written, handwritten form. It is I, Scott Shepard, here on a 6:16 p.m. on a Monday from downtown San Diego, California. What I want to show you today, and check out, look at this beautiful Antinet Zettelkasten, aka Stewie, aka my doppelganger. What I want to show you today is that of the three types of notes. And here I am, I was about to head out, and this is about a day's worth of reading and note creating. And I'm going to show you the different types of notes we have here. Now, believe it or not, I'm not some OCD crazy person wherein this is absolutely perfect. It's not. So if you're wondering if there's like some crazy doctrinaire, pedantic, strict approach and strict reason for the different colors of cards or the sizes of cards, like this is a 4-inch by 6-inch note card versus a 3-inch by 5-inch note card. It's about like 80%, okay, accurate, or I don't know. I ascribe to about an 80%, like rough, what could you say? A rough protocol for my notes and the different types of notes. And Lumen did that as well, and that's the beauty of writing by hand, is you're not locked into some man-made, man-created strict protocol that doesn't allow for really the most important aspect of the Homo sapiens creature, which is the creativity that is spurned and created by one's consciousness, right? We cannot essentially be endlessly creative if we're confined to the man-made systems of the metaphysical digital realm. Okay, I'm going off on a tangent. Anyways, let's just jump into this. So earlier today, it started with, really, and I'll show you the numbers here. There's 4214/20, 4214/20A, and then under that, I branched under that and created a stem under that, 4214/20A/1. And then my latest instantiation is 4214/20B. Now, what started as two different types of notes, and this was spurned by the readings of a knowledge scientist named Richard Yeo and his observations and analysis on John Locke's note-taking style and system. And, I started as trying to break it down and simplify it and break this down into two different types of notes, but then it spurned and developed and evolved into three. And so I'm not going to talk too much about the two types of notes versus the four types of notes. And each model, each framework of how you look at it has its pros and cons. And so that's one of the things you should keep in mind whenever you're doing any type of note-taking is, for instance, Sonke Arens, in his book, How to Take Smart Notes, outlines three types of notes. And those three types of notes are fleeting notes, they are literature notes, and they are permanent notes. And the thing you must know is that that is an Arensian invention. Nicholas Lumen did not use that terminology. That is one person's terminology used to try to communicate a concept, and the concept is the reality of what Nicholas Lumen actually did. The thing is that those are, frankly, poor terms, and I'm not going to get, like, I have an outline, you can screen capture this if you want to go into it, but I'm not going to go deep into why those are poor terms or why those are actually completely, in some cases, inaccurate. Like Lumen did not take fleeting notes, for instance. That's probably an Arensian method or tactic or habit. So Well, that's the preface or the disclaimer of what I'm about to teach you. This is not some doctrinaire, very strict thing, but let's just jump into it. Here are the three types of notes, okay? The first one is excerpts and excerpt notes. Excerpt notes. Great. That's a fantastic English term for someone with a slight and minor lisp to have to say over and over. So, and goddamn, excerpts notes. Okay, and what excerpts are centers around the copying down of quotes or very close summaries, and I'm going to show you some examples of each of these three. Okay, it is the copying down of quotes or very close summaries, i.e. simplifying what an author says. And I do this on 3-inch by 5-inch cards. It forces me to be concise and not belabor and take too long trying to summarize what another person is saying, but to be very, very concise. And this is something that Nicholas Luhmann said, and he has done as well. He didn't always just write out his cues of thoughts, like, hey, this reminds me of X, or this reminds me of this concept, especially if the concept that he was learning was very hard to access, very hard to learn, very hard to even understand. He would write it out by hand to actually even help him understand and comprehend it and learn it. And so that is that type of note, okay, the excerpt note. The second type of note is the observations. These are a brief thought of what it reminds you of. So while you're reading, you're going to have like thoughts that pop into your mind of a concept. And if you use an analog Zettelkasten, aka an Antinet, if properly structured, then you will also think of a key term because you use a physical index that essentially neuroimprints a cue, a key term that represents the idea onto your mind. So while you're reading, you read differently. You all of a sudden, see a certain term. Like for me, it's like selection, because Nicholas Luhmann called his Antinet a selective association of selective associations, something along those lines. But the word selective is neuroimprinted in my mind, right? So that's a key term. And that's an observation I have, like it happened earlier today when I was reading something and it talked about selections, and one must be very selective when reading. So that's a key term, usually underlined, and Luhmann underlined it as well in his bibliography, in his literature notes, and it acts as a cue, and that's what I've just said. So what you'll find in these types of observational notes and observations, I write it lately. I've been experimenting and writing them in the margins of a book, and I'm going to show you that. And in the Nicholas Luhmann world, he wrote him on the back of a Luhmannesque, that's very redundant, but a Luhmannesque Luhmann bibliography card, which I'll show you as well. And I even actually include some observations and observation notes in 3-inch by 5-inch cards. And like I said, you want to be like about, follow this with like an 80% general principle. This is the type of principle in a Antinet Zettelkasten that is one to be followed in general. This is not a specific principle, but general guideline and principle. It's hard to explain how our minds and thoughts work, so it's hard to essentially bucket them into 3 categories, and this is an example of one of them, these observation notes. Now, the third type of note is reflections, and reflection notes are the more in-depth contemplations and thoughts that really 96% should be your own, or even maybe 80%, supported by references, and references that you may have even pulled out via excerpt notes. And these should be on 4-inch by 6-inch cards. And so one of the important things is, Zonke Arens said in his book never to take excerpts, but that's actually a fallacy. I don't want to get into it right now, but Luhmann actually took excerpts and wrote down quotes, and he did it very extensively in his first Zettelkasten and even his second Zettelkasten, and they even went on for multiple cards. And that is something that a lot of the learned men of the early modern Europe and the Renaissance did as well. And it almost became like a problem back in the Renaissance. of some people of the Royal Society of Britain, the British Royal Society of Learned Men would be like, stop excerpting everything. The observational notes is it's what kind of Sankei Arens calls them literature notes, you could say, but he doesn't really even, I've got to refresh on it. I have it in my Antinet, but he doesn't even properly give a good description of what a Luminesque literature note looks like. And then the third thing is reflections. This is what Sankei Arens calls permanent notes, but permanent notes aren't really a good representation or description or best term for what they actually are. Permanent notes are permanency is essentially a property of what they are, because you have a fixed permanent state, and they're handwritten in permanent a permanent format on note cards, which is one of the many issues with a digital Zettelkasten, is the permanency is not really retained. It's always dynamic and always growing and evolving, and that's actually problematic because your system doesn't take on, is what Lumen called, an odd structure, and it has no personality. That's why it's like you want to stamp in, for instance, right? Like, I have 3 cards making an argument for the different types of notes, and I've settled on this one. And the reason that this is a rough, important, rigid, and permanent structure and property is because of the tree-like index, this Antinet structure. So the important thing that this signals to me, the fact that I have 3 different arguments for the types of different notes in an Antinet Zettelkasten, is informative for me, because it's kind of like a GitHub repo showing you how your thoughts have changed over time, and it's in just such a simple format. So I can see not how, what I currently think, because if it was a digital Zettelkasten, I may have, deleted these 2 and said, no, there's really 3, right? But with a physical Zettelkasten and a physical note-taking system, your even mistakes in thinking, and maybe even this might turn out to be a mistake in my thinking. Maybe I can simplify it even more back to 2 and do an instantiation of 2, right? 2 types of notes. So that is recorded and stamped in time, and that is, one of the people. Some people ask, like, oh, what can an analog physical Zettelkasten do that a digital Zettelkasten cannot do? And one of the things is, well, a physical Zettelkasten better exposes your mistakes in thinking, because when you're later reviewing your thoughts in your Antinet, you can kind of see like your missteps in your thinking. You're like, oh, there was 3, but I guess I argued for 4, or then I argued for 2 at one point. And it's very, very prevalent, because you see your own thoughts and your own self arguing for something in your own handwriting, and it humbles you. So it makes it more real that, well, this is your own thought, and you are quite mistaken. Anyway, I'm going to show you some examples really quick, okay? So I'm going to pull this one up. Let's go through an example of an excerpt note. So an excerpt note is something like this, okay? And I just installed the IDs tonight, just a moment ago. But for instance, this is from, and if you notice, I put the reference of where it came from in red ink. So this came from the author Yeo, who I have in my bibliography on page 142. So Yeo, folder 142, is, so the discipline Boyle prescribed careful selection of materials, repeated reflection on key themes, and rehearsal of a skeletal direction of meditation promised to expand the experience stored in memory and facilitate its retrieval. Now, this book is talking about the early modern Europe note-taking methods of a lot of well-renowned and well-regarded scholars of the time. So now, instead of writing that word for word, which I just showed you, which I just read for you, what I did was I consider this an excerpt, and it's simplified a little bit. So you see how I used 1, 2, 3, right? So Robert Boyle's process for basically for reading and developing his knowledge and thoughts was, number one, careful selection of materials of things he read, right? Repeated reflection on key themes. That is, and I add my own interpretations there, that is figuring out where in the Antinet to install the card. So he's repeatedly reflecting on the key themes. Key themes, think like key terms, and figuring out where in the Antinet to install it. And the third one, and he didn't quite use an Antinet. They used different types of things. I won't get into that right now. And then the third one is rehearsal of a skeletal direction of meditation. And what I wrote in parentheses is that is reviewing and doing maintenance rehearsal, which is a type of way for us to constantly refresh on the ideas in our Antinet. All right, so that was an example of an excerpt note, okay? Now, let's pull this second one down. Now, the second one is the observations. See, the observation notes. These are a brief thought of what it reminds you of, or a key term usually underlined that acts as a cue. So lately, I've been doing it in margins of a book, and then there's also the Luminesque bibliography card. I'll show you an example of that, and then even the 3" by 5" card. So the first one, here's a margin of a book, observation note, right here. So I'm just reading this book today. Let's see. Okay, so this section right here talks about the fallacy, essentially, of essentially trying to read and understand other people's notes. And you see, right here, the insight goes to the heart of the matter. Notes work as a prompt or a suggestion to recollect more than the bare note, but the process favors the maker of the original note. See, and this is what Francis Bacon wrote, and look at his Baroque English, it's really funny. One man's general notes will little profit another, because one man's concept doth so much differ from another's. Meaning, whenever you're writing a note like this, right? This is just a prompt for you to recall in your mind of what you really mean. You know, this is just it's essentially acts as a prompt, and it's a prompt for you, the writer, the creator of that note, right? So in the parentheses, I wrote down another similar idea that I have installed in the back of my mind, which is the fallacy of people using like Obsidian Publish to publish their notes as if it's like Wikipedia and as if it's complete knowledge. And it's a Wikipedia fallacy of intercommunication. Now, what I mean by this is whenever you're writing this is a note, it's like interpersonal communication, meaning you're having it's an intrapersonal. Apologies there, I screwed that up. I mean, it's an intrapersonal, meaning you're like having a conversation in your head with yourself as you're writing this. You know, you're creating like this internal dialogue of what this means, making this argument with yourself. With Wikipedia is an extra-personal knowledge system, meaning it's outside of just one person. So when you publish intrapersonal content like this is knowledge that acts as a cue to my own mind and my own memory, right? So it's not that useful. I mean, you guys will probably get some value out of it, but it's not supremely that valuable, because this is the raw material for what creates a book. I need to then simplify it. I need to then tie it all together and create it into something that is more linear and understandable, right? Okay, so anyway, that right there, you see this? That is an observation note, okay? That was a one in the margins. Now, Luhmann's observation notes were often done in the back of a bibliography card, which I probably have some in here. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Like this is a book on memory by Kahana. And so this is another example. This is what Sankei Aren's called literature notes. You see how brief they are, right? So those are observations. And I started doing this, and it was an interesting practice. It was good, but what I have found is that you end up writing down and doing a ton of work, then you then have to go and create like a smaller card anyway. So I like to just, as I go, create the cards. So I skip the step of having this, right? And it's just installed in my Antinet. And there's pros and cons. It's double the work to do this, to like actually first do that hop step and put it into your literature note and then literature note into an Antinet form. The one benefit is that whenever you want to review a book, you can just pull out these cards and see all of the concepts in the actual book. So that is advantageous. You should test both, because this looks pretty, it looks nice, but it is hellaciously long to actually do. And by the time you actually get to your card, you're like so exhausted that you don't actually have that much time to elaborate and write all this stuff out. So that's why I like to do it instantly now and skip that step. But it doesn't matter that much. You need to play with the styles, which I'll be outlining likely in the book that I am working on, and that is part of the thing that you are looking at right now, to make it very clear and simple. Okay, so that was a Luminesque bibliography card under observations. Then the last piece is, what does an observation note look like even as a 3" by 5" card? And so an example of that is this. So this is what I wrote earlier today. John Locke's observation notes are similar to Luhmann's bibliography notes, aka lit notes, in that, like literature notes, in that they were, quote, they were short comments connected with books he was reading. This comes from Yeo 149. So that's kind of interesting because, you know, that observation is Luhmann and John Locke kind of had the similar type of approach to creating very brief kind of thoughts, right? And then expanding upon them either via book form or in what Luhmann did was he wrote them in reflections. Now, which brings us to the last type of note, reflections. And these are the more in-depth contemplations and thoughts, like 96% of your own, or at least 80%, you know, generally, right? So here's an example of a reflection note. This one I wrote just maybe an hour or two ago is, Sankey Arens was incorrect to imply Luhmann's notes were of such a quality not to be much different than they appeared in manuscript form. Because, number one, notes are prompts for further thoughts and recollections. As one knowledge scientist put it, quote, notes work as a prompt of suggestions to recollect more than the bare note. And then you see that little red thing right here? That's a reference to a footnote. So it's a footnote in this actual note, which is kind of helpful. It just adds less clutter to you writing notes. And then the second reason that the quality was not much different and Sankey Arens was wrong was because, well, it's false. One need only refer to Luhmann's notes, and can't even read my own handwriting, that he worked on for publishing Communication with Noteboxes. That's his seminal paper about his own Antinet, right? And to see how incomplete and brief his notes were. Like, Luhmann's notes were not manuscript ready, and that's something that Sankey Arens alleged and wrote about. And this one I haven't filed yet, but it's going to be filed in that section, which beefs out that section and evolves and really adds more substance to it. And then the third reason is that even if it were true that that Luhmann's quality of his notes were not much different than manuscript form, you should not ascribe to such, as Luhmann was a piss-poor writer. And that is an absolute, well, it looks more and more true, but he was. And there's actually good reasons for why he was impenetrable as a writer. Some reasons for even protecting his own life, which I will get into likely in my book. So anyways, that is a framework or a model of the three different types of notes in a Antinet Zettelkasten, a Luhmannesque Zettelkasten. And all of these I will be filing and installing into my Antinet here, aka Stewie. Anyway, I did this on a whim. I could have been better organized and, well, a little bit less, I don't know, down different rabbit holes, and I probably could even make this awesome by editing it, but for the sake of getting this out to you and getting this book out to you sooner rather than later, and even getting some short content pieces out to you, I'm going to hit the publish button. And that's about it. So anyways, Scott Shepard signing off. It's been about 25 minutes after whatever time I initially announced, and I look forward to making more videos for you guys. Anyways, peace and love from San Diego, California. Bye-bye now.